What happens when a country singer who rebuilt his life from addiction and prison sits across from a talk show host who thinks she's the smartest person in the room? What followed became one of the most explosive moments ever aired on daytime TV. Jelly Roll, the tattooed giant with a soft voice and a brutal past, came to The View expecting a normal conversation about his music, his journey, and the mission that turned his life around. Instead, he walked straight into Joy Behar's storm. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, also subscribe. The studio energy was electric as Whoopi introduced him, the crowd rising to welcome a man whose story had inspired millions. Jelly Roll smiled with that unmistakable warmth, ready to talk about his new album, his daughter, and the work he does for people trying to escape the same darkness he once lived in. Everything felt hopeful, until Joy stepped in. As the other hosts asked thoughtful questions, Jelly Roll opened up about redemption, responsibility, and the fight to help former inmates rebuild their lives. His honesty pulled the audience in, but Joy sat back with a smirk that signaled trouble. The moment she spoke, the air shifted. She dismissed his story as convenient and questioned whether his transformation was real or just good publicity. The crowd froze. Jelly Roll kept calm, insisting he wasn't pretending. He was simply sharing his truth. Joy pressed harder, accusing him of benefiting from a redemption narrative while communities still suffered from the drug trade he once participated in. His jaw tightened. His hands curled for a moment before he forced himself to stay composed. But Joy kept pushing. She questioned his motives, his sincerity, even his right to talk about second chances. The final insult came when she suggested he was still the same man he used to be, just richer, better dressed, and rehearsed. That was the breaking point. Jelly Roll rose from his chair, towering over the desk, his voice booming through the studio as he demanded to know whether she truly believed he didn't carry the weight of his past every day. The audience gasped. The room trembled with tension. Joy smiled smugly, pretending his anger proved her point, calling him the real version she suspected was hiding underneath. But Jelly Roll didn't crumble. He shifted from fury to raw honesty, laying out the reality she ignored. He spoke about the funerals of friends who never made it out, about kids he mentors in prisons, about families torn apart by addiction, about the guilt he carries and the work he does to make things better. Joy tried to interrupt, but his voice sliced through hers as he confronted her judgment, her cynicism, and her habit of tearing people down instead of helping them rise. The audience watched as Joy's confidence cracked, her expression shifting from smug certainty to unease. When she tried to defend her approach as journalism, Jelly Roll challenged her directly, asking when she last admitted she was wrong or showed compassion to someone who fell and tried to climb back up. She had no answer. Whoopi tried to calm the moment, but Jelly Roll wasn't finished. He told Joy she had walked into the conversation ready to attack him, ready to paint him as a fraud, instead of using the moment to discuss solutions, healing, or hope. Joy denied being a bully, but Jelly Roll's frustration finally erupted again as he demanded to know what crime she believed he was currently committing. Besides having a past that made her uncomfortable, Joy tried one last angle, accusing him of profiting from redemption while others still suffer. Jelly Roll's voice shook as he explained the weight he carries, the work he does, and the fact that nothing, no amount of success, charity, or advocacy can erase his past. But he emphasized the question she was really asking, whether someone like him even deserves a chance to be better. He made it clear he wasn't sure he deserved forgiveness, but he would spend the rest of his life trying to earn it. Then he turned the mirror toward Joy. He asked how many people she had discouraged from seeking help, how many second chances she had crushed with her cynicism. He told her she had chosen cruelty instead of conversation, drama instead of understanding, and for the first time, Joy had no comeback. When he finished, he addressed the audience directly, speaking to anyone who felt hopeless or judged. Change is possible, redemption is real, and no one should let voices like Joy's convince them otherwise. Joy tried to call him dramatic, but Jelly Roll stopped her cold. He said she had attacked his character, his motives, his redemption, and his right to speak about his own life. And when he defended himself, she tried to dismiss him again. He refused to let her. Turning to Whoopi, he apologized for the chaos, but refused to apologize for standing up for himself. Joy called after him as he walked off, but he didn't look back. "We're done here," he said, leaving the hosts and audience in stunned silence. What began as a simple interview became a clash over human nature, forgiveness, and whether people truly deserve second chances. And in the eyes of everyone watching, only one person walked out with their integrity intact. What happens when a country singer who rebuilt his life from addiction and prison sits across from a talk show host who believes she always has the upper hand? What followed became one of the most explosive moments ever broadcast on daytime TV. Jelly Roll, the tattooed giant with a gentle voice and a brutal past, arrived on The View expecting a genuine conversation about his music, his journey, and the mission that helped him rebuild his life. Instead, he walked straight into Joy Behar's storm. The energy was electric as Whoopi introduced him, the audience rising to welcome a man whose story had inspired millions. Jelly Roll smiled with that warm sincerity that draws people in, ready to talk about his new album, his daughter, and his efforts to help people escape the same darkness he once survived. The interview started smoothly as the other hosts asked thoughtful questions that allowed Jelly Roll to speak openly about redemption, responsibility, and the work he does for former inmates. The crowd was captivated by his honesty, but Joy sat back with a smirk that signaled trouble. When she finally spoke, the entire atmosphere shifted. She dismissed his story as convenient, questioned whether his transformation was real, and implied that his redemption narrative was just good publicity. The audience froze. Jelly Roll tried to stay composed, insisting he wasn't pretending. He was sharing real experiences. Joy pressed harder, accusing him of benefiting from a story that didn't erase the damage caused by his past. His jaw tightened, his hands curled briefly before he forced them to relax. Then she crossed a line. She claimed he was still the same person underneath, just richer and rehearsed. That was the breaking point. Jelly Roll rose from his chair, towering over the desk as his voice thundered through the studio, demanding to know whether she truly believed he didn't carry the weight of his past every single day. The audience gasped. Joy smiled smugly, pretending his frustration proved her point. But Jelly Roll redirected his anger into raw honesty, explaining the funerals he attends, the kids he mentors in prisons, the guilt he carries, and the daily effort required to stay on the right path. Joy attempted to interrupt, but his voice sliced through hers. He confronted her judgment, her cynicism, and her habit of tearing people down instead of helping them rise. For the first time, Joy's confidence wavered. When she tried to defend herself as a journalist, asking hard questions, Jelly Roll challenged her directly, asking when she had last admitted she was wrong or shown compassion to someone who fell and tried to climb back up. She had no answer. Whoopi tried to calm the moment, but Jelly Roll wasn't done. He told Joy she came into the conversation ready to attack him instead of using the moment to talk about healing, solutions, or hope. Joy denied being a bully, but Jelly Roll exploded again, demanding to know what crime she believed he was currently committing, besides having a past that made her uncomfortable. Joy then accused him of profiting from redemption while others still suffer. His voice shook as he explained that nothing, no charity, no music, no advocacy could erase his past, but that he chooses to spend his life trying to make things better. He emphasized the real question she was asking, whether he deserved forgiveness at all. He admitted he wasn't sure he did, but he would spend every day trying to earn it. Then he turned the mirror toward Joy, asking how many people she had discouraged from seeking help with her cynicism. He told her she had chosen drama over compassion, cruelty over conversation. For the first time, Joy had no response. Speaking to viewers directly, Jelly Roll told anyone struggling with addiction or shame that redemption is real and that no one should let voices like Joy's convince them otherwise. Joy attempted to call him dramatic, but Jelly Roll shut her down instantly, saying she had attacked his redemption, his motives, and his right to speak about his own life. Turning to Whoopi, he apologized for the chaos, but refused to apologize for defending himself. Joy called after him as he walked off, but he didn't look back. "We're done here," he said, leaving the studio in stunned silence. What began as a routine interview turned into a battle over redemption, human nature, and whether people truly deserve second chances. And to anyone watching, it was clear who walked away with their integrity intact. Backstage, the tension from the studio still clung to the walls as producers scrambled to figure out how to handle the fallout. Some whispered that the moment would go viral within minutes. Others quietly wondered if Joy had finally pushed too far. Jelly Roll stood in the hallway, his chest rising and falling as he tried to steady himself after the emotional intensity of the exchange. Staff members approached him cautiously, unsure whether to comfort him or give him space. Meanwhile, on the stage, the remaining hosts struggled to regain their composure. Whoopi stared at the desk in front of her, clearly replaying the entire confrontation in her mind. Alyssa whispered to Sarah, both of them shaken by how quickly things had escalated. The audience remained seated in stunned silence, almost forgetting the show was still live. Joy sat rigidly in her chair, trying to keep her posture strong even as the weight of what had happened began to settle on her shoulders. She forced a smile for the camera, but it was thin and strained, lacking the confidence she usually carried. Viewers at home could sense it instantly. She wasn't in control this time. When the show finally cut to commercial, Joy rose from her seat and walked toward the backstage hallway, her steps unsteady. She knew she hadn't expected the confrontation to spiral like this, but she also couldn't admit it. Not yet. As she turned the corner, she came face to face with Jelly Roll. He looked exhausted, not from anger, but from the emotional weight of the entire ordeal. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway felt too small for the two of them, the silence too heavy to ignore. Joy opened her mouth as if to defend herself again, but the words didn't come. Jelly Roll didn't glare at her. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he looked at her with calm, controlled disappointment, something far harder to dismiss than anger. Before she could speak, he simply said, "I hope someday you understand what this work really means." Then he walked past her, leaving Joy standing alone with a realization settling into her expression. She had misjudged him, misjudged his intentions, and, worst of all, misjudged the strength behind his redemption. Back in the control room, the team sat stunned, knowing they had just witnessed a moment that would dominate headlines, social media, and public conversation. Some feared backlash, others sensed a cultural shift unfolding live. As Jelly Roll exited the studio, fans waiting outside clapped for him, calling his name and thanking him for speaking truthfully. He offered a tired smile, grateful for the support, but still processing the storm he had just walked through. Inside, Joy returned to the desk for the final segment of the show, her tone noticeably softer. She tried to move forward with the script, but the weight of the confrontation lingered in every word. And across the country, viewers were already choosing sides, debating redemption, judgment, accountability, and what it truly means to change. As the episode wrapped and the credits quietly rolled, the studio corridors buzzed with a mixture of shock and uneasy admiration. Word of the confrontation was already spreading through staff phones, messages lighting up from people outside the building who had somehow heard what happened seconds after it occurred. Joy remained seated at the desk long after cameras stopped, staring at the empty chairs where her co-hosts had been just moments earlier. The weight of what she'd provoked sat on her chest like a stone, but pride kept her from admitting it even to herself. Producers approached gently, offering neutral, careful questions about how she wanted to address the situation when the clip inevitably went public. She brushed them off, insisting she had done nothing wrong, though her voice lacked conviction. Meanwhile, Jelly Roll stepped outside into the afternoon air, taking a long breath as if trying to release the tension still trapped inside his ribs. He wasn't angry anymore, just drained. A reporter across the street called his name, hoping for a soundbite, but he ignored them, choosing instead to focus on the fans who stood quietly nearby. One young man approached him, hesitating before speaking. He said he had struggled with addiction for years, and that watching Jelly stand up for himself and for every person who had ever tried to change their life meant more than he could express. Jelly Roll placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a few quiet words that brought the guy to tears. That moment, far from the studio lights and cameras, reminded Jelly why he fought so hard in the first place. Back upstairs, a tense meeting was already forming. Executives debated whether Joy's questions had crossed a professional boundary. Some argued that tough journalism was her job. Others insisted she had gone after him with personal hostility rather than genuine inquiry. The debate grew heated, but one thing was clear: public backlash was coming. Inside her dressing room, Joy finally faced a mirror that refused to flatter her. The confrontation replayed in her mind, not as a triumph, but as a sequence of decisions she couldn't easily defend. For the first time, she wondered if maybe she had pushed too hard, not because she regretted asking questions, but because she had refused to listen to the answers. Meanwhile, Jelly Roll was already on his way to another event, his team trying to lift his spirits with humor, but he stayed quiet, staring out the window as the city passed by. Not because Joy's words had wounded him, but because he knew how many people watching needed to see that redemption was real, powerful, and possible, and he wasn't going to let one televised confrontation shake that message. By evening, clips of the confrontation were everywhere. One side saw Jelly Roll as a symbol of redemption, refusing to be shamed. The other criticized Joy for insensitivity and arrogance. Comment sections exploded, reaction videos multiplied, and the moment quickly became the center of national conversation. But beneath all the noise, one truth echoed louder than anything else. People were tired of cynicism. They were tired of watching others get torn down for trying to rise. And Jelly Roll's unfiltered honesty struck a chord across the country, reaching people who knew firsthand what it meant to crawl out of darkness. Joy watched the coverage unfold, the criticism stacking up faster than she could process them. Her expression hardened, but behind it was something unfamiliar: uncertainty. Jelly Roll, however, didn't bother checking reactions. He sat with his daughter that night, telling her that no matter what happens, the world will always have people who try to pull others down. The only thing that matters is continuing to rise anyway. And somewhere in that quiet moment, he understood that the confrontation wasn't a setback. It was proof that his voice mattered more than ever. By the next morning, the confrontation had grown far beyond the studio walls. Major outlets were dissecting every frame. Social media platforms were flooded with clips, and public opinion was sharply divided. Jelly Roll woke up to find his name trending worldwide, though not for the reasons he'd expected when he agreed to appear on the show. His team urged him to release a statement, but he refused, insisting that the footage spoke for itself. He knew that explaining or defending his reaction would only water down the honesty of the moment. Meanwhile, Joy arrived at the studio earlier than usual, hoping to get ahead of the storm. Producers greeted her with cautious expressions, unsure whether she planned to address the controversy or pretend it hadn't happened. Joy walked straight to her dressing room, closing the door behind her as she stared at the stack of printed headlines now sitting on her table. They weren't kind. Words like unfair, hostile, and out of line appeared again and again, each one chipping away at the armor she wore so confidently on camera. She tried to convince herself that she wasn't bothered, but the weight in her chest told a different story. On the network floor, executives held urgent meetings, worried about the long-term fallout. They debated whether to lean into the controversy for ratings or distance the show from Joy's approach. At the same time, Jelly Roll appeared at a charity event, his voice steady as he spoke to a crowd of people struggling with addiction and recovery. He didn't mention the confrontation, but everyone there already knew. His presence alone was enough to remind them why his message mattered. No amount of public criticism could erase the authenticity behind his story. Back at the studio, the live taping approached. Joy took her seat at the table, her face composed but lacking its usual spark. The other hosts avoided eye contact, uncertain how to proceed. When the cameras started rolling, Whoopi opened the show with a diplomatic statement about heated moments and real emotions, carefully avoiding names while still acknowledging the obvious. Joy sat perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly beneath the table. For the first time in years, she didn't jump in with a joke or a comment. The silence said everything. After the show ended, Joy remained seated again, staring at the empty space where Jelly Roll had stood. A part of her wanted to justify herself, to argue that she was simply doing her job, but the more she replayed the confrontation in her mind, the less convincing that argument became, because beneath all the noise, she had finally realized something she never expected. Jelly Roll's pain was real, his journey was real, and his response wasn't performance. It was truth meeting arrogance head on. Outside the studio, fans gathered with signs supporting Jelly Roll, calling him an example of genuine redemption. Joy watched them through the window, her expression conflicted. It wasn't admiration she felt. It wasn't anger either. It was something far more uncomfortable: self-reflection. Meanwhile, Jelly Roll returned home to find message after message from people thanking him for standing up for those who struggle to change their lives. His daughter hugged him tightly, unaware of the controversy but sensing his exhaustion. In that moment, nothing else mattered. He had spoken from the heart, and the world had heard him. As the evening news continued to replay the confrontation, one thing became increasingly clear. This moment had grown into something larger than Joy Behar or Jelly Roll. It had become a national conversation about second chances, compassion, judgment, and what it truly means to rebuild a broken life. And whether Joy admitted it or not, the tide had shifted. The world wasn't rallying behind her skepticism. It was rallying behind the possibility of redemption, and Jelly Roll had become its unexpected voice. If you like this video, then subscribe.